Jacob, thank you for joining us on the Steadfast Running Podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, man. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to get into your areas of expertise and what you're doing to help athletes through 478 athletics. But let's go back, let's get into our time machine and revisit your high school running years because as I understand it, not only were you a state champion in high school, that's also when you started coaching. Is that right?
It is. I started coaching around, it was either late freshman year or early sophomore year. I was a decent high school runner. I started coaching when I was either a freshman or a sophomore, just because I was the fastest guy on the team, and so all the kids that wanted to run in the off season, they just kind of came down there and started working with me, did whatever I said to do, just because nobody else was really down there. But do you want to talk about my athletic background, or what do you really want to get into?
Yeah, what kind of times were you running in high school and what was the coaching situation like?
I had a coach up until my freshman year. I actually started running in fifth grade, but I didn't really get serious about it until I was a freshman. And that was really just because I got beat by a kid that I didn't like. So it motivated me to start training extra and running on the weekends. But I started taking it seriously freshman year. I got a private coach from outside the school, and the school coach was just a parent that was a recreational runner, and he was a great guy. So he knew that the private coach that I was working with was pretty good at what he did. So he was completely fine with me working with somebody else. And only problem was I come from this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I come from a family that definitely teaches you the value of having a work ethic. So I definitely had a work ethic and overtrained a lot while I was in high school. So I never really saw my full potential and probably spent more than half of my high school career injured. But junior year during the summer, I ran a 4:03 in the 1500. That was probably the most impressive race that I ran at any point during high school. So solid, but nothing crazy. It was enough to get me AAU All-American, but I mean, there are kids running that in the mile nowadays like nothing. But my senior year, I herniated disc in my back and had to sit out in that entire season. I think I would have been capable of running some pretty good times that year, but just never got the chance to. After I spent 2 full years injured, I went and ran for Emmanuel College, and I got back healthy and made a ton of progress under Coach Ben Hall. He was a great coach that I definitely took a little bit for granted, since it was a small little NCCAA school. They're now D2, but it was a little small NCCAA school, and I ended up transferring out because I was like a ton of kids who just think that D1 is the only way to make it to the pro level, and I wanted to make it pro. So even though I preach to kids now that you don't have to go D1 to be successful, you can be successful on any level. Like, look at guys like Christian Noble, who, I mean, he's beaten most D1 stars right now, but he's a D2 kid at Lee University. And look at Noah Droddy. He was a D3 guy. You don't have to go D1, but I didn't get that back then. So I ended up transferring to Campbell, which I don't necessarily regret because I got to run with a lot of really good Kenyan guys like Amon Kimboy, who was second in the 3K at Nationals this year. He's now at Arkansas. Amon Terrer, who ended up running semi-pro for a little while. Lawrence Kipkoech, who I think is still trying to run semi-pro. I just overtrained like crazy while I was there. That's kind of the story of my running career. And it taught me a lot. I was a guy who was probably in 1440 shape when I got on campus, and I put myself in a training group with a bunch of 1330 guys, which is never a good idea. So I burnt myself out pretty quick to the point where I really didn't even want to run anymore. And my senior year, I changed my mindset to, dude, you're not going to go pro. So just try and have some fun with it. And it was like, once I flipped that switch and started just trying to enjoy what I was doing, all of a sudden I started seeing progress again. So I ended up running some okay times my last year in undergrad. And then after that, I went and did my grad school and got a master's in kinesiology at Augusta University, and got to run for Coach Adam Ward, who completely turned my running career around and taught me a ton about training. I actually found Coach Ward on Twitter like you found me, because we would like and retweet all the same things about training. So he was always on my suggested list. And since I knew me and Coach Ward agreed on pretty much everything, I wanted to go run for him. And while I was there, I would spend hours in his office just talking about training, anything he could teach me. And I understood, I mean, we agreed on everything, but I understood these things on a theoretical level, whereas he knew how to apply it to the real world. So just sitting in his office I think that was more valuable for me in terms of coaching education than any degree or certification I could have got, because it was like taking a master's course on coaching distance runners from a guy who I think is one of the best coaches in the NCAA and undoubtedly one of the best in Division II. So that's I ran some decent times at Augusta. He got me back in shape, but I think I was 70th at nationals for D2 in cross country, and we ended up 9th as a team, which was the highest finish in school history. And then that year that got cut short because of COVID was that track season, so I didn't really get to race that year. And that was really, I haven't been on a start line since. So that's kind of my athletic career in a nutshell.
I definitely want to unpack the lessons that you learned from Coach Adam Ward, but let me go back to something you said earlier about overtraining. In what sense did you overtrain in high school and later in college? Was it the mileage, the intensity, or maybe a combination of both?
In high school, so I'll just kind of overview what my training schedule was like in high school. It was always 3 workouts a week, like 3 hard track workouts most of the time. And this was one of the biggest issues that I had was I ran every workout like it was a race. Literally, if I was feeling good, I would get to my last rep and I would double my rest time and then run it as a time trial. Actually, first time I ever went under 2 in the 800 was in a 8x800 workout during cross country season. But it's not smart to do that every week. And I was doing it sometimes 3 times a week if I felt good. And on top of that, I was doing a long run every week. And on top of that, I didn't take days off. I ran 7 days a week. And on those other 3 days where I had double recovery runs, I would run them way too hard. Like as a 16 flat 5K guy at one point, I was probably running 6:30 per mile on my easy runs. And while I was at Augusta, I got down to, I time trialed to 14:30 right after COVID shut everything down. Coach kind of sent us home and let us do a time trial. And I ran 14:30, but at the time I was doing 7:30 pace, no faster on my easy runs. So in high school, there was too many workouts within the week. I was running the workouts too hard and my easy runs were too fast. So it was just everything you could do wrong, I was probably doing wrong. I did not have any patience. I just didn't understand the value of recovery. I probably wasn't sleeping enough, definitely not eating enough. I think the only reason that I was ever healthy was just because kids going through puberty are on natural PEDs. So they can handle a lot more than a regular person can.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you got to college, and those years where you were training with the Africans, I mean, you ran 4:03 in high school off not so optimal training, right? And then that shows talent. But then you get to the next level and you're training with these guys. What was that like when you're running with those guys from a talent perspective and you're working just as hard as they are, but you're nowhere near that level? Put us in your shoes.
Oh, I was working harder than them, and it humbles you and shows you that you're not quite as talented as you think you are. Which working harder than them was not a good thing. I should have been working as hard as them. They understood not running all the workouts too hard. And in college, it was only 2 workouts a week. The workouts probably had a little more volume than I was doing in high school within the workout. but it was only 2 workouts a week and a long run. But we would run the long run as basically a tempo run. I think our fastest long run was 15 miles at 5:38 per mile. The last 5 was 5:10, which was faster than I ever ran in an 8K race while I was there. So tells you how hard we were running some of those. And workouts, I still just trying to keep up with those guys. I would end up running them basically as races, running them, trying to average as fast as I possibly could, because I felt like if I was closing the gap on them in workouts, then I was closing the gap on them in terms of ability, and that it doesn't necessarily translate like that, because they weren't going all out every workout while I was. And I think they kind of did this wrong too, but they ran their easy runs a lot of times under 6-minute mile pace. So I wasn't a fan of that at first, and really never was. But when I started running with them, they were like, dude, if you want to be as good as us, you got to train with us. So I went for it, was running 5:50 mile pace for 10-mile recovery runs. And I was just never recovering. If I had one good workout a week, then it was a really good week. And when you're doing 2 workouts in a long run, that's not a good ratio. But so similar to what I was doing in high school, just running too hard, not running slow enough on easy days. Same thing generally.
To your credit, though, while that may not have been the wisest thing to do in training, it doesn't sound like you have any shortage of willpower or mental toughness, or call it what you will. Where do you think that comes from? Is it just the desire to be the best? Was it something from your upbringing?
Both. They kind of bleed together. I mean, I've told a bunch of people this story. This is just kind of the type of family that I grew up in. My 8th grade year at the high school that I was at, you could run varsity as an 8th grader. And so I wanted to go to state as a middle schooler, like high school state as a middle schooler, because, hardly anybody does that. And the coach put me in 5 events: the 2-mile, the 4x1, the 1-mile, 800, and 4x4. You have to finish top 4 at region to go to state. I finished 5th in every single event. And I was so upset about it that I went home and pouted in my room for 3 days. And 3 days later, my mom came in my room and was like asking me what I wanted for dinner or something. And I didn't even respond. She was like, "Are you still pouting over track?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, why don't you get off your butt, put on your tennis shoes, and go run? That way it doesn't happen again next year." And I was kind of like, dang, she's kind of right. But that's just the family I grew up in. They taught me to work hard. They didn't let me not work hard. And sometimes I work often I work too hard. But that was the type of family I grew up in, and I really wanted to be the best, still do. So that, when you got that work ethic and then you want to be good on top of it, you can run yourself into the ground. That's actually the more time I've spent coaching, the more I've come to the conclusion that coaching motivated distance runners is a lot more about holding them back than it is about pushing them. And I was not held back for sure.
And Jacob, while you've given up on going pro, you're not done by any means with your running. You're still young. You may not be in the college system. You may have, I don't know, maybe you've lost that team atmosphere. You have to now support yourself financially, or maybe you're caring for others. But what are your goals moving forward as a runner?
So we were talking offline about both of us having similarities in back problems. And I actually had a herniated disc in October of 2020 that took a long time to recover. And then, when you get injured, you get into an injury cycle. And it's been since then that I haven't really been able to put together any healthy training. But today I ran 5 miles, and that was the farthest I've run in a little while. So fingers crossed this time I'm able to stay healthy and keep building back. But my overall goal, maybe not for 2024, just because time's kind of closing, but I want to get an Olympic trials qualifier in the marathon. I know, just looking back on my logbooks and looking at the times that I was having the most success, it was everything shows I'm a guy that responds well to volume. I'm somebody who, even though in high school I thought I was an 800 guy and ran some good 4x4 legs, I am definitely built for the marathon. So I think if I can stay healthy for a few years, I can get a trials qualifier in the marathon. I just got to string together some healthy training.
Have you tried a half marathon?
I have never raced one because the last time that I raced was before COVID shut everything down, and then races were just about to start back up when I got that herniated disc. I was actually scheduled to run a half marathon, I think 2 weeks after I ended up getting that herniated disc. And that is more of, I think that's going to be my best shot at getting a qualifier, even though now the half marathon standard has gotten harder. So you have to run under 63 now instead of 64. So shoot, the marathon might be even the best bet. But I want to try a half marathon. I've done some in training before. I've actually run, I think, 66 in a training run. I was just doing a 14-mile moderate run and kind of got carried away on it. Wasn't long before I got hurt, but I got a little carried away on it and was I think my last 10K was under 31. So I know I'm capable in the half marathon for sure.
Well, let's go back and talk about guys like Adam Ward, or just mentors in general, influences, whether positive or negative, that shaped you as a young coach.
Yeah, I mean, some guys that I just don't even know, like, I don't know Steve Magnus personally, but him and guys like Renato Canova have had a huge influence on me just because they put out so much free resources. Like, I think I read Daniel's running formula when I was in high school, but I don't think I really digested what I was reading. And then when I got into college and was struggling a bit and really, really got into researching and trying to learn more, I read Science of Running for the first time. I took notes on every page. I went back and read it about 4 times because it's such a deep book. And I swear that book by itself it opened my eyes to so much. And so Steve Magnus has also got, he's got his podcast. He's got the High Performance West Scholar program that I'm a member in. So he does all kinds of things that he's made a huge impact on me. Canova puts out all kinds of stuff, and he's influenced me a lot on things like periodization. Just guys like you that have a podcast and bring guys on. I mean, Jay Johnson, he's put out a lot of good stuff that has hit me. Yeah, there's podcasts. If you want to get better, you can find the resources. I probably bought a new book every week while I was in school, and guys like Brad Hudson, who you've had on here, I've read his book. He's made an impact on me just from the stuff he's put out. I would definitely say Coach Adam Ward is the biggest influence on me just because I got to spend so much time with him personally. And I mean, I think he'd be a good guy to bring on the podcast too. He's just a wealth of information. He taught me a ton. I can't even get into everything that he did just because I would sit in his office for probably 3 hours every week at a minimum. Sometimes I'd go in there at 10 a.m. and wouldn't come out of his office until 3 p.m. practice. So, but he just everything taught me so much.
Yeah, and it's impossible to go into all of his, technical knowledge, but maybe you can describe him as a person. I mean, just the fact that he would spend all those hours with you, that quality, being open with his time, and speaks volumes of what kind of coach he was, right?
Oh yeah, he was definitely willing to help. I had some coaches in the past that if I would go ask them questions like, why are we doing something? Because I always wanted to know why. I kind of have and I do that for my athletes now. I explain to them why. I've actually told athletes, if I can't explain to you why, then you probably shouldn't be doing it, because I don't know why you're doing it. But I'd had coaches before that I would go ask why, and they would get kind of defensive and didn't want to talk to me about it. But Coach Ward was the absolute opposite. He was a lot like what I tell kids to do with me. If I ask why, I better be able to tell you why. So, but yeah, that's how Coach Ward was. If you had any questions, he was way more than willing to help. I'd say one of the biggest impacts he had on me was before I got there, started to really understand. Like, I knew you should take easy runs easy, but I didn't really know what easy is, which is the problem for a lot of athletes. They understand you need to recover on your recovery days, but they don't exactly understand what easy is. And Coach Ward, he really applies that within his program. I mean, he's got guys that run every year that run under 15 minutes in the 5K that run like 7:30 pace on their easy days. So I was a guy who thought 6:40 was easy, and then I stepped into his program and really learned what recovery is. And I think that was a big reason that I got so much better while I was under him, was just because I was actually recovering on my days between workouts.
And just out of curiosity, was Ward prescribing an easy pace for you guys? Was he just telling you to go by feel?
He was, if there was any other coach that prescribed an easy run pace for me, I don't remember it, but he definitely prescribed easy run paces. I specifically remember the summer going into my first season with him. I thought it was a typo because he told me to do my shakeouts based on my, at the time, 15:30 5K coming out of undergrad. He was telling me to do my shakeouts in 8-minute mile pace, and I thought that he had typed something wrong, so I had to call him. But he was very specific. That's one way that people have described him, as very specific. Our easy runs would be 32, 36, 40 minutes. He would progress them like that, 4 minutes at a time. And it would end up looking kind of funny because he did not go by miles. It'd be like, some guys have a 48-minute easy run, some guys have a 56, some guys have a 64, some guys have a 36. He's very specific with what he does, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I just want to jump in and share just a quick personal anecdote. I would run 5Ks in 16, 17 minutes, that range. And I got to a point in my training a few years back where my easy pace was 10 minutes per mile, sometimes even 11. So I've tried going very slow, and it's not a waste of time, especially if the goal for the day is just to recover.
Exactly. Yeah. When I first started doing those easy runs with the team, when I was doing it over the summer, I kind of felt like I was wasting my time. And then I came in and started running with the team. And the good thing is, a lot of the guys on the team were guys that I ran against in high school and was better than. And then when I came into Augusta, they were better than me, and they were running their easy runs at 7:30, 8-minute mile pace, but running 14:40 for 5K. So I was like, oh, well, if they get better off of it, then it must be okay. And I ended up at one point by the end of the season running some of my runs above 8 minutes. And you find out you can go pretty slow without wasting your time. It doesn't take much to get an aerobic stimulus.
How did you decide, Jacob, that personal training or coaching in the private sector and managing your own commercial gym was the path for you? And while we're at it, feel free to talk about 478 Athletics and the services it provides.
Yeah, so while I was in college, I coached a lot in high school, had some really good guys in high school. And then when I got into college, I kept doing coaching, but it was more online just because mostly it was people from back home. And then after college, or while I was in grad school, I was still coaching some people online that had graduated from college. And one of them was actually a personal trainer and business owner. And he'd gotten into pretty good shape under me. And he was like, dude, you should make this into a business. You're pretty good at this. And I was like, well, I mean, if you're saying you want to start paying me, I guess I'll turn it into a business. And so I ended up, he was the guy, Mark Duggan. He was the guy that had the idea to make a business out of it, because I was just doing it just because I liked it. I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life at that point. I was a college kid, so I was used to being broke. I didn't need to pay any bill, except I guess apartment. But I ended up getting into it because of him. And actually, right after I started it, I ended up moving to Missouri for a while to work with him on his personal training business. And while I was there, I'm moving to a town where nobody knows me, so I can't only coach distance runners. So I started working with football players, basketball players, baseball players, doing a lot of stuff in the weight room. And that kind of transformed my understanding of speed development and strength and conditioning, just because I kind of had to learn about it since I was not working with a ton of runners at the time. It was mostly team sport athletes. So Mark Duggan was definitely one of the big reasons why I ended up creating 478 Athletics. Now I'm back home in Georgia, ended up buying a gym. So 478 Athletics is now a commercial gym. We got memberships. We do, I do personal training through there for everything from speed and agility, combine training for football and baseball, coaching track and cross country, just personal training for people who want to lose weight, whatever. I'm doing just about anything. And I've got a good bit of athletes that I'm coaching online. Obviously want to get some more, but I do online programs as well.
Well, congratulations on starting your own business. That's a big deal in any industry.
It was
yeah, and I'm sure that is helping bring in a stream of clients, and your presence in the community as well has amplified.
Yeah, it's a very small town, so a lot of people already knew me just because, I mean, I think my hometown, now there's a town connected to it that's bigger, but my hometown had a population of, I think, 1,000. So everybody knows everybody. When I walk into Walmart, if somebody sees me, I just say my mom's name and they're like, oh, that's who you are. So a lot of people already knew me, but now having the gym and doing a lot of coaching, my name's definitely getting more out there, especially since I've been gone for, I think, 7 years. So now I'm back and people are remembering me.
Well, here's a big question. So take your time, take as much time as you need to reflect on it. When you think of coaching at a philosophical level and your particular style of coaching, what coaching means to you, why did you choose it? Apart from the fact that, this is what I've always done, this is what I'm good at, it's convenient at this point in time. And why do you continue to choose it on a daily basis? What qualities do you focus on, or are you constantly trying to work on to improve your craft?
Okay. So just why I coach, kind of like I said earlier, I came from this, I always wanted to be the best. And I know what that's like. I know there are a lot of kids out there that want to be the best, but maybe don't have the resources or don't have the coaching for it. So I want to see kids get better. I mean, I am more excited. We've got our region championship tomorrow for the high school team that I'm coaching, and I am more excited about seeing these kids succeed than I think I was at any point during my athletic career. Seeing myself succeed, it's just as rewarding to see kids get better as it is to see yourself get better. So it makes it a ton of fun. It doesn't feel like a job. And that's what motivates me to keep learning more every day, keep listening to podcasts like yours, keep reading anything I can get my hands on, is just because I want to see these kids get better. And if I've got a kid that isn't getting better, I lose sleep over it. I've got one in particular right now that I've lost a lot of sleep over, just because he got sick earlier this year. He was in probably 47-second 400 shape, and he just hasn't been running anything like that recently. And it has been killing me. And I'm constantly trying to learn more about 400 training, just see if I can figure something out with him. But that's what keeps me doing it every day. Is it's just as rewarding coaching and seeing other people get better as it is getting better yourself. So it definitely doesn't feel like a job.
Yeah. And that's the art of coaching too, right? Because if everything would always go according to script, you could just follow a program you copy from online.
Yeah.
But you're the boots on the ground. You're the psychologist.
No, the if you write a training program, I actually used to offer like 16, 20, 24-week training plans, and I cut that out really quick because plans never go according to plan. Anytime I would write a plan, I would get a text within like 2 weeks that, something came up, just personal things, and they had to miss a workout or something, trying to figure out how to adjust for it. And, you're always having to move things around, make adjustments. Maybe I wrote out a plan for this track season before our first track practice with this team. And I probably changed it once a week just because maybe we'll come off a meet and the kids look tired. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do 2 times 450 today if they're looking tired. So we got to figure something out. But yeah, that's the art of coaching. It's not, you can't just go by a script and expect it to work. If it was that simple, everybody would be good.
Exactly. And we know that coaches make mistakes. Both you, everyone does. And we're always looking for ways to level up our practice. Runners are no different, some of them being self-coached. What mistakes have you made looking back that could maybe serve as red flags for anyone on that path towards self-actualization?
So like I was saying earlier about myself as an athlete, I overtrained a lot, and my coaching early on was very much based on what I was doing as an athlete. So of course, everybody I was coaching, I was overtraining. And the older I've got, the easier my training's gotten. Basically, if you looked at my programs from back in 2012 or 2013 when I coached my first athlete, and then looked at them now, it looks so much easier now. It looks like back then I was trying to kill somebody. But I just too much intensity back then, not prescribing easy run paces back then, so people would go too fast, of course. Just not programming in off days at any point, even for undeveloped athletes. And you you learn from all that, and my training's definitely gotten easier as I've gone. I would say big red flags are just if the athlete is getting exhausted, then it's definitely too hard. Like with my athletes, if they're feeling tired for more than a day or two, I'm gonna back off. I don't want them feeling tired. I know especially right now, it being marathon season, I guess people are tapering for their marathons now, but marathoners especially, they like to glorify the grind and digging yourself into a hole and being tired for months. And I don't believe in that. I don't like for athletes to get so fatigued that they feel like they're having trouble getting up in the morning. I don't like for them to get very fatigued at all. I think training should be fun. I don't think it should feel like a job. But yeah, just I don't want kids getting super tired. That's, I guess, the longer I've gone, one of the big lessons that I've come across.
Yeah, excellent advice. It's the stress and adaptation cycle.
Yes. Yes.
I always ask coaches for advice on professional development, and you already touched on this briefly, but maybe we can go into it just a little bit more in terms of books or clinics, certifications, courses online that you can take just to become a better version of yourself as a coach. Would you have maybe a book or two you want to recommend? It doesn't have to be a book, but any type of resource that we can all check into if we haven't already.
I would definitely say Science of Running would be, I don't think I'd recommend the book over it. Science of Running by Steve Magnus. I think there's another Science of Running out there, so make sure it's the Steve Magnus one. I haven't read the other one, but there's some other great books out there, but there's that High Performance West Scholar program that Magnus does. There's a lot of good resources on that. That's actually where I got most of the articles on Canova that I found. There's also, there's a lot of good articles out there, like the Norwegian model that came out recently, going over the Ingebrigtsen's training, and there's another one that was, dang it, who was it? One of the Norwegians that was good a couple decades ago. He put out a bunch on lactate threshold training. But yeah, that book, the Scholar program, Altus World, they've got a lot of good stuff just for if you're wanting to learn about speed development. They've got a lot of stuff that will teach you what to look at when you're trying to when you're looking at mechanics. They've got a lot that will show you what to look at and what good mechanics should look like and how to actually teach that to an athlete, and a lot on speed development, how to structure those types of workouts. And then there's a ton of podcasts. I feel like I've gotten so much from podcasts. I've actually I recently, now this is a sprint coach, but Les Spellman, he works with a lot of combine athletes in the NFL. And this is just one example of how much I've gotten from podcast. He's probably got 70 episodes out or something like that. And and they're not even long episodes. They're like 5-minute, 10, 15-minute episodes. And I took all of my notes on my phone, copied them into a Word document, and had almost 100 pages worth of notes in a Word document just on Les Spellman alone. And then you throw in all the other podcasts that I've listened to, like yours, like Seconds Flat, like Jay Johnson, On Coaching. I know I'm forgetting some, and I don't want to forget any. Swap by David and Megan Roche. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but there's tons of podcasts like that out there that they bring on great coaches like you have. Like you've had Jeff Mezer on, Jason Karp, Brad Hudson. Those are some really high level guys that you can learn a ton from.
Yeah, and I'll throw in another one. Sweat Elite recently had Coach Canova on there.
Yeah, I'm for them too. I forgot about that one.
So Jacob, you have a master's degree in kinesiology, like you mentioned. So you obviously have the science background to go deep into training talk, which we love to do on this podcast. And having worked with all kinds of athletes, not just runners in your scope of practice, and that includes athletes in the more power-based sports where speed, agility, and explosiveness are arguably more important than things like aerobic development. I think you are the perfect person to ask, how can we help distance runners improve their speed? But before we get to the how, could you maybe start with, what do we mean by speed? Because we're not talking about how fast you can run a mile or half a mile. Maybe you can define speed first, and then why speed is important, especially if we're talking to a 4 or 5 hour marathoner or a 30-minute 5K runner who is thinking, well, I'm never going to be fast.
Yeah. So I'll just go through the why and how real quick. So when defining speed, what I'm looking at when we talk about speed is max velocity, which I get from either a 5 or 10 yard fly split. So like I'll have somebody run a 50 and I'll take video of the last 10 yards, get the split, plug it into a calculator that spits out however many miles per hour that is. And that's what I define as speed, because that is your top speed. Now, if you don't have the technology to do that, you can do a 50 or do 100, but just getting something that's an actual sprint time. Two big reasons why we want to do this, and they kind of go together, but mechanics and overall efficiency of movement. It's a lot easier to move, or a lot easier to run with sloppy mechanics at slower paces than it is at fast paces. So doing some faster work just gives them an opportunity to refine their mechanics and practice running more efficiently. And I mean, I especially like using hills for this sort of thing because hills, even more so than running on flat ground, just makes you run with proper mechanics. You can't really overreach on a hill, and it definitely forces you to get a little more firing from the glute. So you basically teach these mechanics without much cueing when you're on a hill. And then the other reason is this concept of speed reserve, which definitely goes with the efficiency aspect. But the concept, as I understand it, is that with all else remaining equal, if you can improve an athlete's top speed, then it'll make slower paces feel easier in relation. So basically, if you can take a high school 2-miler and improve their 100 ability from 13 seconds to 12 seconds with all else remaining equal, then they'll be able to run faster over their 2-mile because they'll be more comfortable at their 2-mile pace. It'll just be, it's like if you boil it down to, or like in a 200 and a 400, if you can run a 24-second 200, then running 50 is going to be kind of hard because you're not slowing down much, versus if you can run 23, 50 is going to be easier in relation because it's not as much a percentage of your top speed. And that extrapolates out all the way to longer events. Like, I think it was Jeff Boley that I heard talking about this. I know Gareth Sanford's put a lot out about it too. I think it was Jeff that I heard talking about a research study that actually shows this to be true and applies to distances all the way up to the marathon, which, makes sense because we know how important efficiency is. And if you can make an athlete more efficient, then of course they're going to run better. Now, how I do it, like John O'Malley says, our feet move fast every day. I microdose it in. I do it really often, but I don't overdo it, especially with distance kids. With sprinters, I definitely don't do it every day because their nervous systems are so powerful that they do need recovery in between. And we definitely do a little more volume of it. But slow twitch type distance kids don't need a ton of it to get an adaptation from it. You can literally do 2 or 3 fly reps as part of your warm up, and that's plenty to get a response. Like I said earlier, I like to use hills too. We'll do it as like, even before long runs, sometimes we'll do some fly reps. Like I'll have them just do a little 800 warm up, go through our drills. We'll do a couple 50 flies, and then I'll send them out on their long run or get them ready for their first rep of the workout. Now, the warm up will be a little different if it's a workout day, but most of the time when we do it, it's in the warm up of a workout. Now, on our recovery days, we do touch on it a little bit. We'll do strides after our easy runs and our medium long runs and even our long run. But and at the end of workouts, we're pretty much always finishing kind of fast. And I always tell them the first few, like if we're doing 4, the guys today did 4 strides at the end of their easy run. And I told them the first few don't have to be fast, but by the last one, I want you to feel like you're sprinting. So it's not a ton. It may only be 50 yards, but we're touching on it every day. So you're, like I said earlier, you're microdosing it in. You're consistently letting your body see what that feels like, learning these better mechanics, basically, this more efficient movement. Now, when we do it, there's this debate that is going around that you can only do this when you're fresh. And I know me and some coaches kind of got into this on Twitter a little while back. Anecdotally, I think the less developed you are, the more true that is. But especially at Augusta, I've seen some really well-developed kids run their fastest fly reps at the end of a 90-minute medium long run. I mean, personally, when I was at Augusta, we would do 50s in our warm-up before workout sometimes. We didn't do it all the time, but we would do it sometimes. And they were, a lot of times, even though it's my workout day, this is the freshest I'm going to be during the entire week, but somehow I would run slower than I would after a medium long run. It was just, I think we were so well developed aerobically that going on a long or a medium long run was just a good long warm up and got us plenty loose for it. Like guys like that, they've just gotten to the point where doing that sort of run is literally just a recovery day. But with that being said, like I said earlier, most of my less developed kids or younger kids, we do it on our workout days and our or our long run days before the workout. So when they're fresh, there's no time that they're going to be fresher than right after the warm up on their workout day, other than maybe race day. So that's just going off of that. You can only do it when you're fresh concept. This is, in my head, the best time to put it. Now, a lot of coaches, maybe can't. I think they could put it in the warm up as long as they don't do too much, but you know what I'm saying? I know a lot of coaches do it after their medium long run and try to get more of a workout out of it, like do more reps. But I like to just get a few reps in as part of the warm up and then microdose it in with the strides. And I think the weight room and plyometric work can also bleed into the speed development, which I know you wanted to talk about strength training anyway.
Yeah, I just had a thought, Jacob. Would it be advisable for someone or a coach who's programming workouts to devote an entire session or day just to speed development instead of adding it in during the warm-up or after that 90-minute run, for example? Would you ever consider doing it in isolation?
I think it depends on the type of athlete that you're working with. Like if you're working with an 800 runner, then maybe yes. But if you're getting into longer events, I don't think that it's valuable, but I don't think you should take aerobic development out in place for it, especially since you don't have to get a ton, or you don't have to do a ton to get a response from it. So I don't think you necessarily need to develop a whole day to it, but there are some coaches that do it and they do it well. So I'm not going to say that you can't, but I personally don't, just because I value aerobic development so much that I don't want to take any volume out for it.
Yeah, that's very well said. Could you explain from a science point of view why neuromuscular training in terms of muscle fiber recruitment is important for distance runners?
Yeah, that's I was actually going to get into that with strength training if you want me to, because that's what I'm focusing on with strength training, and that's really true with fast hill reps and sprinting as well. It all kind of works on the same thing. All these things bleed together. But
yeah, let's hold off on that question, actually, Jacob. So we'll wait until we get into the strength training component of our conversation. But actually, here's another one that came to mind. Is there a distinction, and I believe there is, but is there a distinction between speed and what we see in a finishing kick? So when a pro runner, for example, is closing a 10,000 meter race on the track in 52 seconds, we're seeing a combination of speed and also something else, right?
Yes. I mean, obviously, if you're going to drop a 52 at the end of a 5K, then you've got to have 52-second ability, but you've also got to be able to get to that last lap without being very tired. So that's a lot of times with the kick, you're not seeing who has the best speed. You're seeing who is the least tired at that point in the race. So that's how I differentiate it. The kick is not about who has the best top speed. It's about who can display their speed at the end.
Absolutely. Agree with that 100%. So now let's talk about strength training. We know that strength training is one of the back doors, if you will, to improving someone's basic leg speed. Could you talk about the distinction between heavy lifts and body weight, circuits style strength training, and how you might put all of this together within a training block where, of course, the primary activity is running?
Right. Yeah. With you saying the primary activity is running, I do want to preface the strength training conversation with, you're a runner. The most important thing in your training is the running. And while I do think that runners should go heavy on lifts and should get into the weight room, it shouldn't come at a cost to your running. If you're lifting so much that you're too sore to execute your workouts, then you're doing more harm than good there. But if you do it right and you don't overdo the weight room, which I have made the mistake of doing in the past, then you can get a ton of benefit from it without it coming at a negative to your recovery from your workouts. But on the body weight versus heavy lifting, I don't use much body weight except for maybe as a warm up. Like I use Jay Johnson's lunge matrix. I use that daily as just part of a warm up to get them moving in a bunch of different planes of motion before a run. I feel like that's one of the best warm ups you can do, just especially for an easy run, because you're not really doing any type of warm up before you take off on an easy run. But that's almost the extent of body weight work that I do, other than jumping activities that are body weight, like broad jumps and vertical jumps and stuff like that. But that's more, I look at those as plyometric more so than just a body weight strength exercise. There's not a ton of recruitment from the body weight exercises, at least in comparison to lifting heavy. So I'll use it with guys that are really, really undeveloped as sort of a bridge into lifting, or use bands or very lightweight just to bridge them into lifting, make sure they have the mechanics down before we actually try to load it up. Like, you don't want to take a kid that's never done a trap bar deadlift before and say, okay, we're going to max out today. That would be idiotic. You're probably trying to get them hurt. But that would be a good starting point, to start with low weight, get the mechanics down. And then from that, I like to move into heavy weights. Really, my weight programs for runners isn't a ton different from how I train team sport athletes. It's just, like I said earlier about you're a runner, your main thing is the running. That's true with team sports as well. But I think football players can push it a little more in the weight room than runners can without seeing a negative to their sport training. So with the runners, we do heavy lifting. Once we get those movement patterns down, we load up movements like trap bar deadlift, rear foot elevated split squat, RDLs, and we go for sets of 3 to 5, and we get pretty heavy on them. We don't, I'd never max out, but we're getting to a point where you're not necessarily straining through it, but it doesn't feel easy. We just don't do very many sets. It'll be at most 2 to 3 working sets of 2 main heavy lifts after some warm-up sets. I want to do enough to get that recruitment, but without really breaking them down. I will say that I prefer to progress to unilateral variations like the rear foot elevated split squat or like a single leg RDL, just because getting them on one leg, for one, it's more specific to their task, because running you are on one leg, but it also helps to eliminate some imbalances and compensations. There's a higher stability requirement, so you get more activation of stabilizer muscles. There's also this concept of bilateral deficit, where your nervous system, if it can focus on that one leg and send all of its signals to that one leg, then you're going to get more out of that than you will a bilateral movement. So I don't think I explained that well. If you're doing a bilateral movement, and let's say it's a squat, and your max is 200, you will be able to do more for a max on a unilateral version than you would be able to do more than half. So basically your 2 legs max would combine to be more than your bilateral version, because your nervous system can focus on sending all its signals to that one limb. Now, the reasons we want to get this recruitment is because it can transfer over to improvements in running economy, because our nervous system now has this bigger pool of fibers to work with. Basically with that, our body's able to display more force into the ground with each step, because these neural networks get upgraded, which of course results in improvements in running economy and possibly max velocity. You get all this neural activation, and you end up with improvements in running economy.
That's a great place to start, Jacob. Let me see if I can unpack some of this for our listeners. So maybe what are 3, 4 exercises? I know you mentioned variations, different variations of squat, different variations of deadlift, including both single and double leg. Is there anything else they can do in the gym, and how often during the week, or should they be thinking about doing this on an easy day or after a hard session? Just practical things like that that maybe you can chime in on.
Okay, yeah. So are you meaning like, you want me to expand on heavy movements or other little things to tag on to the main movements?
The heavy lifts.
Okay. The main ones that I like to do are trap bar deadlift, rear foot elevated split squat, RDLs. Some athletes will get into hip thrust. And I mean, there's a ton of different variations that you can do with those. Like RDLs, I like to progress to single leg RDLs. Split squats, you can do regular split squats, you can do reverse lunges, you can do rear foot elevated split squat. Then I also like to get them moving in different planes of motions. I like to add in some side lunges just to get them moving side to side. There's a lot of different muscles on the outside of the hip that get used in that. So those are the main movements that I go kind of heavy on. And outside of that, we do a lot of hip exercises more for mobility purposes, but things like the Myrtle routine, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a series of hip exercises like donkey kicks and fire hydrants and stuff like that. I like to do hip controlled articular rotations, which are basically like you take your hip joint through its full range of motion really slowly, and it just helps to open up the hip, get a little more mobility in there. Hurdle, over unders, lunges, all that just helps to open up your hip. I like to work in core stability as a filler in supersets. So we may do, we'll do our deadlift, we'll do an upper body exercise like a row or a pull up. Just with upper body, I like to focus on things that are going to kind of pull their shoulders back and improve their posture. So looking at the upper back and the low back. So that's mainly pull-ups and row variations and maybe overhead presses. And our supersets we'll put those as a lower body movement. At certain points, we'll do a power version. So maybe with trap bar deadlifts, we'll do dumbbell jumps, and we'll do an upper body movement. And then as a filler while you're resting, we might add in a plank or a shoulder tap plank or a power off press, something like that. Now when to do it, I definitely want to keep the easy days easy. So I am not a fan of doing your lifts on your easy days. I definitely want them done on the workout day. That way, when you get out of workout day and you get to your recovery day, you can just focus on recovering and being ready for your next workout. I definitely want them put on the workout day. I've had athletes in the past that had to do it on their easy days just because of scheduling, and we had to back off a ton on the lifting because they couldn't lift heavy and then turn around and do a workout the next day and not feel the effects of it. So if you want to get the most out of your lifting, I think you need to put it on your hard days. But there are some coaches that I don't really know how they structure their week, but they prefer to do it on non-hard workout days. That way the athlete's fresher. And I'm just not sure how you would structure your week with that. Like, if you're going to do that, then I feel like you need a recovery day coming out of that as well. And then all of a sudden you're taking one easy day after the workout before a lift, and then you're doing your lift, and you're taking one easy day after the lift. And I don't think the lift is so valuable that you need to have 4 days in between workouts and to be able to put it in. So definitely want it on the hard days. And structure them like I was saying earlier, with the working a little bit of upper body movements to improve upper body posture, and heavy lower body movements, and doing a little bit of core work as filler.
I also put it on the hard days, and I like that you got into not only the strength but also the mobility aspect of strength training. When you look at an entire competitive season and you're having your runners lift heavy. As you get closer to the target race, are you tapering off? And if so, like maybe a week out, 2 weeks out, do you have a general rule of thumb, or do you lift heavy all the way up to the target race?
We definitely, with the lifting, taper off, but it's not so much tapering off the weight, it's tapering off the volume. So like it's the same thing that I do with team sport athletes in season. If they built up to doing sets, let's say 3 sets of 3 at 85-90% of max, then we're going to stay there, but we're going to do like 3 sets of 1. So we're going to do some heavy singles. They're still going to get that recruitment, because the only way to get that same amount of recruitment, unless you move the weight faster, is to go with that weight. If you go lighter, you're maybe not going to end up with the same fiber recruitment. So we just taper off the volume. We'll go down from sets of 3 to 5 to maybe instead of 3 sets, we'll do 2 sets, and we'll cut the weights down, or the reps down, just a little bit. But we definitely keep the where they are.
Okay. And where would plyometrics fit into this scheme? So things like skipping, bounding, box jumps. If you're periodizing this strength training, would you start with heavy lifting and then maybe move into more explosive stuff later on in the season, or are you throwing it in right from the beginning?
I like to, it's sort of like I'll talk about later with just running training in general. I want everything to be present all the time. So even early on, there will be some plyometric work. Now, with things like skipping and bounding, I really don't even consider that a weight room activity. I do a lot of that within our warm-ups or before our strides after an easy run or medium long run. So we'll do that on the track at the workout or up a hill. Like I love bounding up a hill, but that's when we're mainly working that sort of stuff in. In our lifts, we will complex things together, like I was saying earlier, with trap bar deadlifts and dumbbell jumps. We may also, as we go, stay with trap bar deadlift and just lower the weight a little bit, but focus on bar speed. So trying to move the bar really fast. The cue is get up as fast as you can. So yeah, that's where we start working in power work. I keep that in very early. It just won't be very much. Maybe if we're lifting 2 times a week, we'll only do a complex within 1 superset throughout the entire week. But towards the end, we may be doing a complex within every set or every superset during the week, and maybe focusing on bar speed a little more with the main lift as well.
Okay. Good stuff. If anything else comes to mind about strength training as we get into more general training concepts, feel free to throw that in there. But now I want to pivot to how you individualize training for your athletes. So for example, you start working with a new athlete. One of the most important things to do is get to know that athlete and tailor your approach based on their strengths and weaknesses. What are factors that you look at that differentiate in your mind what runner A is going to do versus runner B? Maybe you run a set of diagnostics right off the bat to determine what their speed is like, or whether they're more strength oriented or more speed based. Things like that come to mind for you.
So when I first start with an athlete, if they have PRs, that like if they've competed in a range of events before, then I like to do a PR comparison of, if I would preferably like to see that they have run at least a 4x4 split all the way up to, let's say, a 2 mile. That way I can look at what are they relatively better at? Are they naturally better in the longer stuff? Or are they naturally better in the shorter stuff? Because that kind of tells me what are they going to respond well to. Because if they're naturally better at the longer stuff, then, and this is where I think I go a little against traditional thought, because think the traditional mindset would be if you see a kid that doesn't naturally have speed, then you need to hammer them with speed. That way they get it. And I look at it as if a kid naturally better at the long stuff, then we need to focus on what they're good at and build their training around that. So that's going to be the type of kid that responds well to volume, responds well to threshold work. And we just need to touch on the fast stuff because they don't need a huge amount of that stimulus to get an adaptation from it. Versus if we've got a kid that is naturally better at the short stuff, then they're probably going to do well with more short reps. And the thing is, you still want to get aerobic development out of it if there's somebody that's going to run longer events. So I like to do like short fartlek reps. So while runner B that's better naturally at the longer stuff would be doing, let's say 3 on 1 off for a fartlek, and runner A who's naturally better at the fast stuff, we're still going to get the same volume in, but runner A might do 30 minutes worth of 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. Their fartlek reps are going to be much shorter. That way they can go faster because that's the type of stuff that they're going to respond better to, is that faster work. And we're also going to value the short speed development work a little more because they're somebody that doesn't need to go out and do really long runs to get an aerobic adaptation, whereas distance kid does. So that's kind of how I look at individualizing them, is look at what they're naturally better at and try to build the training around what they're good at and just kind of touch on the stuff they're not good at, because they're not going to need a huge amount of it to get better at it.
I love that, because I also believe in looking at someone's response to training and focusing on that while, like you said, touching on everything else.
Right.
What are your core training principles? So going extremely basic here, right? And I think we already know what one of those is for you, making sure you run your easy days easy enough, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can name off the top of your head a couple other training principles you feel strongly about, or go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about common training errors that you come across often.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, easy runs easy is definitely one of mine. Just valuing recovery in general, because one of my, I'd say the biggest piece is consistency. If you're not consistent with your training, you're not going to get very far. If you are consistent, even if it's with less than optimal training, you're probably going to get better than somebody who's not consistent at all, even with the best training. So if you're valuing recovery and taking your easy runs easy, that's just going to set you up to be able to be more consistent. So that's one of the main reasons that is one of my key tenets, I guess. I really, really value being able to be consistent. Like I was saying earlier with, I don't want kids getting run into the ground, feeling tired, having bad workouts. Even if they just have one bad workout, I start kind of diving in. I'm like, what did we do wrong? Even if it maybe wasn't something that we did, maybe it was just, they broke up with their girlfriend and life stress made them tired. I still try to back off anytime that I see something like that, because I would rather, sort of like Tin Man says, keep the ball rolling than end up getting them tired and digging them into a hole, because then we're not going to see any adaptation out of their work. So I think that kind of gets into a common training error too, is trying to train through fatigue and not taking life stressors into account. Like with my current injury, like we were talking about offline, for me with that, I was actually healthy. I was running well. And I started coaching at the high school. I started taking a lot more people on through the gym. I had more people coming to me for online training. And I actually had another high school ask for me to come out there and help out some. And, I couldn't say no to more coaching. So it was putting too much on my plate. And I didn't take any of that into account with my training. And I actually ended up just straining a muscle in my groin just because I didn't take life stress into consideration, which I know that as a coach to take it into account with my athletes, but it's harder on yourself. But that's a very common training error, like with high school kids or even college kids, when they're in like finals week, like to back off the training because they're going to be really stressed out at that time. So you definitely need to take that sort of stuff into account. Definitely value recovery. There's a lot of people out there that they don't put as much stock into the recovery days as they should. The recovery days are just as important as the hard days. The recovery is actually where you get better. You don't adapt from doing the hard work. You adapt from recovering and rebuilding from the hard work. So I think the recovery days are more important, but.
Exactly. In my case, Jacob, with my back injury, what broke me wasn't the running per se. It was the running on top of everything else I had committed myself to. Like you said, too much on your plate.
Yeah. You definitely have to take stuff into account.
Yeah, life stress. So why don't we, as we get closer to the end of the interview, why don't we tease out a 16, 20, 24-week, what have you, training cycle, and how you would periodize it for a 1,500-meter runner, 5K runner, let's say. Maybe it's someone who wants to run a fast 1,500 this summer and then will start a block of marathon training for the fall, something like that. How would you deconstruct that for us? And of course, we're not going to be able to go into great detail, like every single day, what you would prescribe, but just from a bird's eye view.
Yeah. And there's also, I'll just talk generally because, there is you got to look at the individual athlete that is in front of you and everything. But just generally, I want all things present all the time. The only thing that changes is the emphasis. I think Brad Hudson might have actually said that exact same thing on your podcast at one point. But I want to work general to specific. It's kind of Canova-esque. I use a funnel periodization model. So we start with working general speed and general endurance. So early on, we are putting more stock into the speed development. We are trying to get faster. We're looking at short hills or short fartlek reps that, we're working on turning over faster, that force production into the ground. And then on the other end, we're looking at general endurance, where we're just building the volume of easy runs and slow tempo runs. And then as we progress, maybe this is a little too general of a example, but just as we progress through, it's like a funnel. You just get slightly more specific as you go. So maybe we'll start off at, on the speed development end, we're doing fast hundreds with a 300 jog recovery at, 400 effort, let's say. And on the other end, we're doing, if we're talking about a 1,500 runner, maybe we're doing somewhere between tempo and threshold work for, say, longer fartleks and just straight tempo runs, or threshold runs maybe. But as we go, those fartleks they'll go from maybe marathon pace to half marathon pace to, we'll start to get into a little more 10K type work. Then maybe 8 weeks out, we're getting into, or 8 to 10 weeks out, we're getting into 5K type work. And then in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we're starting to get really specific to the 1,500. Those longer workouts are 1,500 to 3K pace. And the shorter workouts, we're going from early on, we're maybe hitting around 400 pace. We're going really fast. And as we go, we're lengthening those reps out, but we're getting a little more specific. So towards the end, those shorter workouts may be 200s at 800 pace, or 300s at 800 pace, or maybe some quick 400s. But yeah, that's how I look at it. As we go, they're going to get just more specific to the end goal. And of course, if you're preparing somebody for a championship race, then we'll get into some fast starts, alternations, hammer reps, wind up reps, just to prepare them to change gears in a tactical championship style race. So like with fast starts. We did a lot of that at Augusta because we knew for a cross country national championship, you're going to have to take off pretty fast. So if we were doing 1Ks at threshold, coach would often send us out and tell us to run the first 300 at like just a little over 4-minute mile pace and then settle in. And so we would definitely work on that, especially with a 1500 runner, because you have to get out fast on that back stretch to get into position a lot of times. So we may, for some of those workouts, take off really fast and try to settle into pace. With alternations, you can kind of get into some faster and slower work with that. Like a lot of marathoners, they'll do alternation 1Ks where they'll do 1K at slightly slower than marathon and 1K at slightly faster than marathon. And you could do the same sort of thing with a 1500 runner. You could do 200 at a little faster than 1500 and 200 at a little slower than 1500, maybe like 3K pace. And that's going to teach them to be more comfortable at 1500 pace. And it's going to turn that slightly slower than 1500 pace into an effort that feels like a recovery. With hammer reps, we did a little bit of this at Augusta. I actually first heard about this from Scott Simmons, who coaches, I think they call it American Distance Project. That's the Paul Chalimo group. With that, we'll do, let's say we're doing 10 times 400. I use this a lot more with longer distance athletes, but let's say we're doing 10 times 400, just as a random example for a 1500 runner. You might run the 7th rep almost all out. And then on the next few reps, you're having to try and hold pace. So that's going to prepare you for a lot of times in championship races, it takes off kind of slow. And then you have to throw down this random surge. And it's not like the race is over after that. You have to be able to settle back into pace and not fade. So we're practicing that. And then wind up reps. I love those just because it kind of, you're getting yourself pre-fatigued and then trying to sprint at the end. So it's very specific to what you want to do in a kick.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the use of multiple paces within a given session, because you're taking advantage of lactate dynamics. And I'm hearing a lot of that from you. How do you determine your athletes' training paces? So for example, when you think of energy systems and, okay, what is this runner's threshold? Are you plugging numbers into a calculator? Or, I know Canova, for example, does it based off, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know about Canova, but I'm not a Canova disciple, perhaps like you are. He does it off of percentage of goal pace, right? So how do you think about that?
Sometimes I do percentage of goal pace, but for a lot of people, I especially more the slow twitch type distance runners that are more aerobically based, I think 10 man's calculator is pretty conservative, and I like to lean more on the conservative side. I've used the McMillan calculator before and the Daniel's VTOT charts, and sometimes I feel like those are a little aggressive. So I like to look at, I like to use the 10 man one, especially for distance runners, just even though it's not perfect, but I feel like it's a little more on the conservative end, and I would rather play it safe than have them overtrain. So that's how I determine those longer distance paces, like tempo and lactate threshold. If they haven't run a longer race, like a half marathon, let's say, where I can accurately predict off what their 1 hour race pace probably is, then I'll just plug a long distance event into a calculator for that sort of thing.
Okay. And the length of your microcycles, do you work with 7-day training cycles or 10-day, 14-day?
It depends on the athlete. I have had people do 9-day cycles. I've had people do 8-day cycles. For many, especially working adults, you kind of have to do 7-day cycles just to work it within their busy lifestyle. But it really just depends if they're able to recover off of a 7-day cycle, or if their workouts aren't so demanding that they need multiple days to recover, then yeah, we'll stick with the 7-day cycle. But I've had people that their workout volumes got pretty high just because they built up to that over time. And we got to a point where I felt like I needed to move to 8 or 9 day cycles just to give them that recovery time between workouts. And normally when we go into an 8 day cycle, it's actually, I'm adding an extra recovery day coming out the long run. So like, let's say day 1 is a long run, and in a 7 day cycle, it would be day 2 easy run, day 3 fartlek workout, day 4 easy run, day 5 medium long run, day 6 tempo threshold type workout, and day 7 is off, recovery, cross train, whatever. On an 8 day cycle, it's just the only difference is coming out of the long run, we'll do an easy run and then another easy run. That way, I've got some athletes that their long runs just have gotten long enough that they need that extra day coming out of it to feel fresh for that fartlek workout.
Right. Yeah, got it. Speaking of adult recreational runners, there are 2 areas that I find myself focusing a lot on for these runners, and that's teaching them how to listen to their body. So effort-based running. And also we do a lot concerning race planning and race strategizing. Any experience or thoughts related to those areas for you?
So talking about teaching them to kind of feel paces, I like to go off of effort. Early on, I use paces, but I tell them I want it to feel like this sort of effort. And as they grow and sort of learn what these efforts feel like with a, let's say, threshold run, I normally want that around 7 out of 10 effort if we're actually hanging around actual threshold, which normally, if we're going to get into it, I don't do straight threshold runs typically, unless it's with a shorter 1500, 800 type runner. Most of the time I break those up into reps like 1K or 1 mile maybe. But anyways, I tell them what it should feel like on a scale of 1 to 10. And as they go, they start to kind of feel those efforts and not have to look at their watch to be able to hit the right ranges. With that, if they're having a day where they kind of feel off or they're running on a course that's new to them and they're not going to, maybe it's more hilly or it's hot outside, they're going to know what effort to run. And just, I'll tell them not to look at their watch and they'll just stick to the effort. Now with easy runs, I end up, and really this is true of workouts too, especially early on, I end up putting a lot of speed limits on athletes. Especially with the easy runs, I'm telling them, with these high school kids, when I first came out, they would go out and take off on their easy runs and run within a minute and a half of their 2 mile pace. And I'm like, whoa, let's, you're not allowed to go faster than 9 minutes a mile. And they were like, what? This feels like nothing. But they also aren't having as much trouble recovering between workouts. So that's, I tell them I want it to feel like a 2 out of 10 effort. And I think they're starting to learn what that effort actually means. But yeah, I definitely like to teach effort that way when we go out into, if it's hot here in the summer or we're running on a hilly course or they don't have a GPS watch, they can still run the right effort on that day.
Okay. And I have to ask this question. It's just a fun question. My favorite distance happens to be the 5K. What is your favorite 5K workout? Maybe it's a good tune-up session or a good simulator for you, a confidence builder, in other words, that you like to use for 5K runners.
Oh man. I don't think I necessarily have a favorite workout. I like using 1Ks. Normally if I'm doing 1Ks, I'm going slower than 5K pace, but I'm not, if we get into it, I'm not a huge fan of like VO2 max type work, at least over like doing a ton of it. So a lot of my workouts are longer and the working above race pace, and the shorter ones are like, we're actually going to go short reps like 400 and 600. So it's not I feel like if you're wanting a confidence boost for a 5K, you need to do some longer reps and hang at 5K pace and feel comfortable at it. And most of the time, if I'm trying to get specific to a 5K, we're not going super long. Maybe at the very end, we'll do like 2Ks at 5K pace with pretty long recovery, like 3 times 2K or maybe 4 times a mile. I guess those would be my my favorite really specific workouts, but I don't necessarily have a favorite workout.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the fact you don't like to work in that VO2 max range, 3K pace, 5K pace. And that actually reminds me a lot of Ben Rosario's work with his group of runners, because he prefers to do more threshold based work. And of course, he's not the only coach in the world doing that, but I just heard him talk the other day on a podcast echoing what you're saying. And he's one of the best coaches in the United States.
Yeah, I actually I hadn't heard that podcast. I saw that he was a guest on one of the podcasts that I follow, but I don't think I'd listened to it yet. I've actually heard Mike Smith talk about this pretty extensively on a couple podcasts, and who doesn't like Mike Smith?
Yeah, Mike Smith is another great example. So let's bring this full circle. Earlier, we established, I think, really well that strength training has performance carryovers, performance benefits. Have you found in your practice, Jacob, that it also has profound injury prevention benefits? Have you seen less runners get injured? I mean, of course, runners are going to get injured. There's no bulletproof system for that. But have you noticed that runners tend to get less injured when they're serious about their strength training?
Definitely. As long as they're not, overdoing it and creating injuries in the weight room. Yeah, definitely less injury prone if you're strong. I mean, most injuries come from being weak. So, of course, getting yourself strong is going to help prevent both chronic and acute injuries. Most of the time, I know the traditional medicine practice is if you're injured, ice it and rest. And I'm no doctor, but most of the time, if a kid's hurt, I'm like if it's an IT band issue, I'm immediately saying, hey, put this band around your legs, do side lying leg raises. Let's do some clamshells, whatever gets work on that tissue. Same thing with there was a kid the other day that had something going on with his ankle, and I told him to go home and start doing some banded ankle exercises, and he hasn't mentioned it since. Last time I asked him, he said he hadn't felt it. So a lot of times, not only do I think that strength training helps prevent injuries, but I think it's also the answer for a lot of nagging issues is to get stronger in that area. I think a lot of times if you have a nagging issue, it stems from being weak in that area.
Okay. Yeah, well said. And finally, Jacob, is there anything I left out or any message you would like to leave our listeners with as we sign out?
I don't think we really left anything out. I think we've been going a pretty good while. Yeah, I think we covered plenty. I mean, there's plenty more things that would be fun to talk about, but I don't want to keep you all night,
I do appreciate your time. I really do appreciate you being here today. Thank you for sharing your story and for all your insightful remarks. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've learned a lot from you. So thank you again.
Hey, I really appreciate you asking me to come on. It's pretty cool to get invited to come on a show with some of the guests that you've had in the past. I can't say how much I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
All right. That's a wrap. Thank you so much, man. That was fun.
Yeah.